More American parents are choosing not to have more than 2 kids, and that means far fewer middle children in the world. A recent article in The Cut addresses this. It's titled The Extinction of the Middle Child, and the article looks at the personality traits most closely associated with the middle child and whether being a middle child helps or hurts them. Adam Sternbergh wrote that article, and he joins us now. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So why are families getting smaller than they were in the past?
Well, I think there's a lot of evident reasons. You know, people are waiting longer to get married. They're waiting longer to start their family. So the years that they have to have children are getting shorter. And also raising children has become much more expensive, from, college education to housing costs. I think a lot of people are looking at it as an economic decision. When you have 1 kid, I think that's a decision you make with your partner. 2, but when you get to 3 or 4, you really start to have to crunch the numbers on it.
And how has that led to the decline in middle children?
Well, 40 years ago, in the mid-'70s, the most common family configuration was 4 or more children. And then the second most common was 3 kids, and 2 kids was sort of right there with that. That's flipped on its head now. So the most common configuration is 2 kids. A lot more people are just having 1 kid. So when you put the 2 and 1 child families together, you have about 2/3 of families with children don't have a middle child. Obviously, you need to have at least 3 to have a middle.
So I got to admit, you are a middle child. I'm just curious, even from your own personal experience, what are common traits that you find most closely associated with being a middle child?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I did associate with being a middle. My parents would often say that I was acting in a typical middle child way, usually trying to get attention. I was always the one in the family that would try to broker peace between my siblings. I was the one who would grab a funny hat and put it on and try to, get people to pay attention to me. And that's something we associate with middle children, is that they don't have a sort of the lionized status of the firstborn. They're not the baby of the family. They're sort of left in the middle. There is a new way of thinking about them, though, that suggests that the traits that you develop when you're a middle child are actually strengths, not burdens.
I'm curious, you talk about the strengths of the middle child, but what does it mean for the world if we're seeing this disappearance of the middle child?
Well, in the article, I really wanted to explore sort of what people think when they think about middle children, what kind of traits middle children have. They're really good negotiators. They tend to be very diplomatic. They also tend to be trailblazers because they're not always burdened by the expectations that we might associate with a firstborn. So as there are fewer and fewer middle children, you would expect to see that these traits would be diminished a little bit. Obviously, there's still going to be a lot of middle kids out there, ideally negotiating and brokering pieces and blazing trails. But, it just struck me, it's interesting that there's an entire subset of kids that is going to be rapidly diminishing.
So I want to ask you, your article, it was retweeted over 1,000 times. It was liked by over 3,000 people. Why do you think, Adam, this really hit a nerve?
Well, certainly a lot of middle children out there, I think, were eager to read it, and were eager to learn about themselves and sort of what the future is for middle kids. But of course, everyone who's in a family is a something, right? If you're an only child or an oldest or a youngest or a middle, everyone can relate to the idea that, people want to think about the ways in which where they are in their birth order might have affected the way their personality turns out. And for some people, I think they find that there's a lot of overlap with the usual traits. And with some people, they say, oh, I was the firstborn, but I'm more like the baby. But in any case, it's interesting to kind of think about yourself and your siblings and how you all fit together.
Yeah, it's always so fun to see. I mean, I'm the oldest of the two, my brother and I always feel like there are specific oldest things, traits that come along with being the oldest child and traits that come along with being the youngest. But ultimately, what do you hope? I know you looked at the middle child, but what do you hope folks get with your article?
I had an interesting conversation with one of the psychologists who said, she's not advocating that people have more kids or anything like that because it's such a personal decision for people. But she does want people to think about not only their middle kids, but all their kids a little bit differently, and the traits that they're instilling in the kids and the ways that we can, foster those sorts of traditional middle child traits in all children, being a peacemaker, being a good negotiator, being resilient. That's something we associate with middle children. And so those are traits we ideally see in all our kids. And if we think about them as traits, we might think about ways to instill them in everyone.
Fascinating article, Adam. I'm very grateful. I am sorry to hear about the plight of the middle child, as you are one. But I tell you, I have 2 kids. I'm not going to have another one. I just can't do it.
I have 1. And someone asked me if I'm planning to have more, and I said, there's a very good chance there won't be a middle. That much I can say.
Well, right here, we've explained why it's declining. I want to thank you, Adam Sternbergh, very much for joining us.